It is a universal truth among those who have worn the uniform. The day you transition out, you trade one set of expectations for an entirely different, often bewildering reality. You leave behind a culture built on mission, clarity, and accountability, only to enter a labyrinth of bureaucracy where the mission seems to be delay, confusion, and denial. For many veterans, the Department of Veterans Affairs is not a safety net. It is a source of profound, repeated trauma. The trust that was freely given during service is often shattered by the system designed to support them after service. This isn't about isolated incidents. This is about systemic failures within specific offices and programs that consistently erode confidence, leaving veterans feeling abandoned, invalidated, and frankly, lied to. We're going deep today, peeling back the layers on the 7 VA offices and functions that veterans consistently report they will never, ever trust again. And understanding why is the key to navigating this system without losing your mind, your benefits, or your hope. Let's start with the administrative black hole, the place where time itself seems to stretch into an impossible, agonizing infinity. The first office veterans learn to distrust, often profoundly, is the appeals process, specifically the Board of Veterans' Appeals, or BVA. When a veteran submits a claim, they expect a simple yes or no based on the evidence they provided and the sacrifice they made. But when the answer is no, or when the rating is insultingly low, the appeals process is supposed to be the safety valve, the place where a second fair look is guaranteed. Instead, it becomes the ultimate endurance test, a bureaucratic nightmare designed, many veterans believe, not to render justice, but to simply outlast the claimant. The distrust here isn't just about losing, it's about the deliberate, soul-crushing pace of the system. We are talking about years, not months, years spent in limbo, waiting for a decision that could mean the difference between financial stability and poverty, between receiving life-saving treatment and continuing to suffer in silence. The BVA, in the eyes of countless veterans, operates under a presumption of guilt, forcing the veteran to prove, repeatedly and exhaustively, that their service-connected disability is real, that their pain is legitimate, and that the initial denial was simply an error. This adversarial posture is the first crack in the foundation of trust. Think about the psychological toll this delay exacts. Imagine submitting your entire life history, your medical records, your combat experiences, your personal testimony, and then being told to sit and wait, sometimes 5, 7, even 10 years, while the physical and mental conditions you are claiming continue to worsen. The VA has implemented the modernized appeal system, attempting to streamline the process into 3 lanes: the supplemental claim, the higher-level review, and the BVA appeal. While these changes were touted as improvements, for many veterans, they simply introduced a new layer of complexity, new terminology, and new opportunities for the VA to fail its duty to assist. The distrust stems from the inherent opacity of the process. You submit your appeal, and then the file vanishes into the digital ether. There is no consistent communication, no clear timeline, and often the only way to get answers is to hire expensive legal representation or a veteran service organization, VSO, representative, which immediately suggests that the system is too complex for the average veteran to navigate alone. This necessity for external advocacy reinforces the idea that the VA is not acting as an ally, but as an opponent. The distrust deepens with every passing quarter, with every annual review that shows minimal movement on the claim. Veterans report feeling intentionally stalled, believing that the system hopes they will either give up, pass away, or simply lose the will to fight the endless paperwork and procedural requirements. This institutional inertia, particularly within the BVA, is why so many veterans swear they will never put their faith in that process again, opting instead to exhaust every other avenue before succumbing to the decade-long wait for justice. The BVA represents the ultimate bureaucratic betrayal, promising a final review but delivering only perpetual delay. Moving swiftly from the administrative quagmire to the clinical confrontation, we arrive at the second major source of distrust: the compensation and pension, C&P, exam contractors and the examiners they employ. For veterans seeking service connection, the C&P exam is perhaps the most critical moment in the entire claims process. This is the moment where an examiner, often a third-party contractor hired by the VA, not a dedicated VA physician, spends maybe 15 to 30 minutes with the veteran, and then writes a report that can determine tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in lifetime benefits and access to care. The fundamental conflict of interest here is impossible to ignore, and it is the absolute core of the distrust. Veterans feel that these contractors are not primarily focused on providing a comprehensive medical diagnosis. They are focused on minimizing the VA's liability. The veteran feels interrogated, rushed, and often invalidated. The stories are legion and remarkably consistent. Examiners who appear uninterested, examiners who clearly have not read the veteran's extensive medical file, and examiners who seem determined to attribute the veteran's service-connected condition to pre-existing factors, or the natural aging process. The high turnover rate among these contract examiners means that veterans often see someone who lacks specific expertise in military trauma, burn pit exposure, or complex musculoskeletal injuries common in service members. Imagine a veteran suffering from severe PTSD after multiple combat deployments, finally opening up about deeply painful traumatic events, only to have the examiner interrupt them, look at their watch, and declare the exam complete. This experience isn't just frustrating, it is a profound violation of trust. It reinforces the belief that the VA views the veteran as a potential expense rather than a patient in need. When the resulting C&P report contains factual inaccuracies, misrepresents the veteran's symptoms, or outright ignores crucial evidence provided by the veteran's own treating physicians, the veteran feels deliberately undermined by the very system tasked with assessing their needs fairly. They are forced back into the appeals cycle, armed with the knowledge that the initial denial was predicated on a flawed, rushed, and biased assessment. The C&P exam, especially when conducted by contractors who are paid per exam and have no long-term relationship with the veteran, is consistently cited as the single most infuriating and untrustworthy part of the entire claims journey. Veterans often enter these exams with dread, anticipating the fight, knowing they must be hyper-vigilant to ensure their truth is documented accurately. Because history proves that if they don't fight, they will be dismissed. The fact that the VA relies so heavily on a system that prioritizes speed and cost efficiency over comprehensive, unbiased medical assessment is why veterans have zero faith in the integrity of the C&P process itself. It's a mechanism of denial, cloaked in medical jargon. Our third area of profound distrust moves us squarely into the realm of clinical care, specifically the VA's mental health services, particularly regarding continuity of care and specialized trauma support. For many veterans, the wounds they carry are invisible, and seeking help for mental health issues requires immense courage and vulnerability. The promise of the VA is comprehensive, confidential, and specialized mental health care tailored to the military experience. The reality, however, is often a revolving door of providers, crippling wait times, and a EEC system that leans heavily on medication management rather than deep specialized trauma therapy. The breakdown of trust begins the moment a veteran reaches out for help and is immediately placed on a long wait list for an intake appointment. This delay, sometimes weeks or months long, communicates a devastating message. Your crisis is not urgent enough. When a veteran finally gets connected, they often face a new challenge: provider instability. VA mental health clinics frequently struggle with high turnover. A veteran might spend 6 months building a fragile therapeutic relationship with a psychologist, slowly starting to unpack years of suppressed trauma, only to be notified that their provider is leaving the VA. This forces the veteran to start over, retelling their most painful stories to a new, unfamiliar clinician. This repetitive re-traumatization is not just an inconvenience. It is actively harmful, teaching the veteran that vulnerability will be punished by abandonment. This cycle leads many to simply disengage, concluding that the system is incapable of providing the stable, continuous support necessary for genuine healing. Furthermore, veterans often report a lack of specialization in critical areas. While the VA has excellent providers, accessing those who specialize in military sexual trauma, MST, or specific combat-related trauma, like moral injury, can be nearly impossible, especially in rural areas. Instead, they are often shunted into generalized group therapy or prescribed cocktails of medications. The distrust intensifies when veterans feel their complex trauma is being reduced to a simple checklist of symptoms that can be managed pharmacologically rather than therapeutically addressed. The ultimate devastating failure of trust in this area is reflected in the heartbreaking statistics of veteran suicide. Every veteran who takes their own life represents a systemic failure, a moment when the promise of specialized, immediate care dissolved into bureaucratic delay and provider instability. Veterans lose trust in VA mental health when they realize the system is structured to manage the symptom, not heal the wound, and when they feel their life or death need is treated with indifference and administrative slowness. They are hesitant to become vulnerable again, knowing the system has repeatedly proven it cannot hold that vulnerability safely. Next on our list, and perhaps the most terrifying failure of trust, is centered around critical moments. The emergency room and urgent care services within the VA system. When a veteran experiences a medical emergency, a sudden severe illness, a debilitating injury, or a mental health crisis requiring immediate intervention, the expectation is that the VA, as their primary healthcare provider, will deliver fast, high-quality, life-saving care. The distrust arises when the reality is long wait times, insufficient staffing, and a critical lack of coordination that turns a moment of crisis into a bureaucratic hazard. Veterans recount harrowing tales of arriving at a VA emergency department, ED, only to be met with hours-long waits, even with severe symptoms. This delay is often attributed to understaffing, outdated triage protocols, or the simple fact that the VA system is perpetually overwhelmed. The feeling of vulnerability in an emergency is extreme, and when the system fails to meet that basic standard of immediate care, the resulting distrust is absolute and unforgiving. Consider the veteran with severe chest pain, fearing a cardiac event, who is forced to wait, while administrative staff struggle to verify their eligibility or locate their electronic health record. Or the veteran experiencing acute suicidal ideation, who is placed in a holding area for hours, waiting for a mental health consult that may or may not materialize quickly. In these moments, the veteran realizes that the VA's emergency system is fundamentally broken, prioritizing procedure over preservation of life. Furthermore, there is profound distrust regarding communication and continuity. If a veteran uses the community care program for an emergency outside the VA, as they often must due to distance or capacity, the administrative process for getting that care approved and paid for often falls apart, leaving the veteran with staggering bills and administrative headaches. After the crisis has passed, the VA's promise is seamless care. The reality is often a fragmented mess, where the veteran must fight both for their life in the moment and for financial solvency afterward. This failure in the ED and urgent care setting is particularly damaging because it occurs when the veteran is at their most helpless. They are literally placing their life in the hands of the VA, and when that trust is broken, When delays lead to negative outcomes, or when they feel their emergency is trivialized, they vow never to rely on that system again for critical care, opting instead for civilian hospitals and accepting the financial risk, because the risk of VA neglect is perceived as greater. The inability to deliver timely, decisive care during a genuine emergency is the ultimate breach of the covenant between the veteran and the institution. Our fifth point returns us to the heart of the claims system, focusing on the sheer inconsistency and lack of accountability found in the regional offices, ROs, and claims processing centers. While the BVA handles appeals, the ROs are where the initial claims are processed, rated, and decided. The distrust here is rooted in the feeling that the outcome of a claim is less dependent on the veteran's evidence and more dependent on the luck of the draw, which Veterans Service Representative, VSR, or Rating Veteran Service Representative, RVSR, happens to pick up their file. Veterans consistently report a maddening inconsistency in decisions. Two veterans with nearly identical service records, deployment histories, and medical evidence can submit claims for the same condition and receive wildly different ratings or even opposite decisions, one approved, one denied. This lack of standardization breeds deep cynicism. It suggests that the system is arbitrary, guided by the personal interpretation and workload of individual processors rather than clear, consistent regulatory standards. The distrust is fueled by the constant loss of documentation. Veterans spend countless hours gathering service records, private medical opinions, buddy statements, and personal diaries, only to be told weeks or months later that the VA never received critical pieces of evidence. This failure to properly track and incorporate documentation forces the veteran to resubmit, further delaying the process and adding to the administrative burden. Veterans feel that the system is designed to lose paperwork as a form of passive denial. Furthermore, the difficulty in obtaining clear, actionable answers from the ROs is a major source of frustration. Attempts to call the VA hotline often result in generic responses from contractors who cannot access the specifics of the file. Scheduling an appointment via VERA, Veterans Experience Action Request, can provide some clarity, but even then, veterans frequently report being given contradictory information by different VSRs. The feeling is that the ROs operate behind a veil of secrecy, making it impossible for the veteran to understand why a decision was made or what evidence was ignored. This opacity leads to the inevitable conclusion that the VA is not acting in good faith. When the rules change constantly, when decisions are inconsistent, and when essential evidence disappears, the veteran concludes that the RO is fundamentally unreliable and untrustworthy, viewing it as a bureaucratic lottery where the odds are always stacked against them. They lose faith in the integrity of the initial decision-making process because it feels entirely capricious and dependent on the individual who happens to handle their file that week. The sixth area where trust is systematically demolished involves the most vulnerable veterans, the fiduciary program. This program is designed to protect veterans who, due to injury, illness, or cognitive impairment, are deemed unable to manage their own financial affairs. The VA appoints a fiduciary, a third party, often a relative, friend, or professional, to manage the veteran's VA benefits. While the intention is protective, the execution often leads to profound abuse, mismanagement, and a feeling of being completely stripped of autonomy. The distrust veterans feel here is existential. It's about control over their own lives and money. The VA's determination that a veteran requires a fiduciary is often based on limited medical evidence or flawed assessments, and challenging this determination is notoriously difficult, trapping the veteran in a system where their financial decisions are controlled by someone else. The most egregious failures of trust arise from the lack of robust oversight on the fiduciaries themselves. Stories of fiduciary mismanagement are shockingly common. Slow disbursement of funds, misuse of benefits, or fiduciaries charging excessive fees that deplete the veterans' resources. Veterans report feeling infantilized, having to beg for access to their own money for basic needs, and finding that the VA is incredibly slow to investigate or remove a fiduciary, even when clear evidence of neglect or fraud is presented. The VA is supposed to be the guardian of these funds and the protector of the veteran, yet when the system fails, it leaves the veteran financially paralyzed and emotionally devastated. For veterans who have fought for their country, being told they are now incapable of managing their own finances and then seeing those finances mismanaged by the VA's appointed agent is a catastrophic violation of dignity. The distrust is not just aimed at the individual fiduciary, but at the VA system that grants such immense power with such minimal, ineffective oversight. Veterans who have been through this program often describe it as a form of state control that is impossible to escape, reinforcing the belief that the VA, despite its claims, does not truly respect their autonomy or their intelligence. They lose trust in the VA's ability to protect their most fundamental interests. Finally, we turn to the program that promised flexibility but delivered administrative chaos. The Community Care Program, CCP, and the referral maze it creates. Established to allow veterans to receive timely, necessary care from private providers when the VA system cannot meet their needs due to distance, wait times, or lack of specialty. The CCP sounded like a revolutionary step forward. However, the implementation has been plagued by bureaucratic hurdles, constant denials, and a referral process so convoluted that veterans often abandon the attempt to seek care altogether. The core of the distrust lies in the perceived intentionality of the obstacles. Veterans feel that the VA actively discourages the use of community care by making the process impossibly difficult, thus pushing them back into the overcrowded VA system. The referral process is a nightmare of phone tag and paperwork. A veteran needs a referral from their VA primary care provider, PCP. That referral must then be approved by a VA utilization manager. It is then sent to a third-party administrator, TPA, often a massive private contractor, who is supposed to find a community provider, schedule the appointment, and ensure payment. Veterans report the process breaking down at every single step. Referrals are lost. TPAs take weeks to find a provider, often violating the statutory wait time limits. Appointments are scheduled, but the TPA fails to send the authorization to the private provider, leading the veteran to arrive at the appointment only to be turned away because the VA hasn't guaranteed payment. This is not a rare occurrence, it is systemic. Imagine suffering from a painful condition, waiting weeks for a referral, finally getting an appointment, and then being denied care at the last minute because of an administrative failure on the VA's end. This is profoundly dehumanizing and a massive waste of the veteran's time and emotional energy. The criteria for eligibility, the distance rules, the wait time rules, the best medical interest determination, are constantly changing and often inconsistently applied, making it impossible for veterans to confidently plan their health care. They lose trust in the community care program because it feels like a false promise, a system designed to look good on paper but engineered to fail in practice, forcing them to navigate a triple layer of bureaucracy, VA PCP, VA management, and TPA, just to see a doctor who is 15 minutes away. When accessing basic necessary health care becomes a full-time administrative job, the veteran inevitably concludes that the VA cares more about controlling costs and minimizing external utilization than it does about the health and well-being of its clients. The CCP, intended as a solution, has become yet another layer of untrustworthy complexity. So, where does this overwhelming lack of trust leave the veteran? The common thread running through the failures of the appeals process, the C&P contractors, mental health services, emergency care, regional offices, the fiduciary program, and community care is a pervasive sense of being viewed as an adversary, a burden, or an administrative problem rather than a patient, a client, or a deserving hero. The system, at every crucial juncture, substitutes genuine, personalized support with bureaucratic hurdles, delays, and a presumption of denial. The veteran's decision to never trust these offices again is not an emotional overreaction. It is a rational response to repeated institutional betrayal. They have learned through painful experience that self-advocacy and extreme vigilance are the only tools they possess against a system that is too vast, too inconsistent, and too slow to be reliably counted on. The takeaway here is not to abandon the VA entirely, but to approach these specific, high-risk functions with eyes wide open. Understand that the Appeals Board is a marathon, not a sprint. Recognize that the C&P exam is an adversarial proceeding, not a therapeutic one. Accept that accessing mental health or community care requires relentless self-monitoring and documentation. The goal of sharing these painful truths is not to discourage, but to empower. By understanding precisely where the VA system fails and why veterans lose trust, you can arm yourself with the knowledge needed to navigate the labyrinth, protect your interests, and ultimately secure the benefits and care you earned and deserve, without relying on a trust that the system has proven, time and time again, it simply hasn't earned. Be your own best advocate, because when it comes to these 7 offices, the veterans who have been there will tell you the system is not built on faith. It is built on paperwork, persistence, and profound skepticism.